Okay, this video is why do some vegans get sick? And it just made me think of when I was a wrestler in high school and I got injured. One of my friends, sort of assistant coaches, gave me a book. It said, "Why do bad things happen to good people?" Okay, so anyways, that was a long time ago. Why do some vegans get sick? Okay, and people have mentioned to me recently a pretty famous guy. I think he was a vegan. I don't know for sure. I haven't studied his life in much detail, but Hans Deal. I know he did some good things. I think it was called the CHIP program with regard to teaching people about healthy diets. Okay, and so let's talk about why a person who's now a vegan might get sick. Well, first of all, they're going to have a significant amount of baseline disease typically. They probably ate the SAD diet or some version of the Mediterranean diet with oil at least up until 25 years of age. So what percentage of herbivores, and humans are herbivores, gets atherosclerosis if you feed them a high-fat diet? They all do, 100%, okay? So they've accumulated some damage from that. They've all got atherosclerosis. That's why I kind of think the coronary artery calcium test is a bit of a joke. If you've been eating the Western diet or the bogus fake Mediterranean diet, you've got atherosclerosis. You don't need a test to prove that. Okay. All of us are exposed to some toxins from personal care products, from the water, if you drank tap water especially, from the food, from the stuff being sprayed in the sky, all that stuff. Okay, and many of us are exposed to some less commonly thing. Like, let's say you're in a house where they're always frying food. You're exposed to cooking oil fumes. Let's say you live near a factory. You're exposed to those toxic chemicals. A lot of those things are SERCA inhibitors. Sarcoplasm, endoplasmic reticulum, calcium ATPase inhibitors. For example, in processed food, there's tons of preservatives, like that BHT and all that stuff, THPQ and all that stuff that are toxic to these calcium metabolism enzymes in your brain cells and the rest of your body. Okay, so anyways, you can't change the past. So let's just forget about the past. But it's wise to assume you've probably been exposed to some stuff that's not good for your health. Some people have genetic vulnerabilities based on some gene that's less able to detoxify something. Okay, fine, but that's rare. Okay. Anatomical variants are common though. I'm just going to show you one. Like, for example, I look at brain MRIs all the time, and this is a very common variant I see in the brain. Normally, okay, so here's the anterior circulation, the carotid artery. Here's the posterior circulation with the basilar artery. Normally, there's a small connection between the two called the posterior communicating artery. And typically, it's a small vessel, not that important. The reason I mention it, though, is some people have these big honking posterior communicating arteries. It's called persistent fetal type because persistent fetal type, PCOM, posterior communicating artery to PCA, posterior cerebral artery. The point of the matter is, in these patients, all of their circulation to let's say the occipital lobe is coming from this persistent fetal artery. The relevance is, in this setting, the artery to the posterior fossa brainstem tends to be small, like the basilar artery. So they have a hypoplastic basilar artery. The vertebral arteries, feed into the basilar, so sometimes it's called the vertebro-basilar system. The relevance is when you've got a narrow, very narrow baseline artery to the brainstem, let's say the pons, for example, the little tiny perforating branches that come off the posterior wall of this small basilar artery can easily be occluded by mural atherosclerosis. It's very common to have chronic, mild to moderate mural atherosclerosis way before, decades and decades before developing a full-blown complete arterial occlusion. So what I'm saying is, somebody with this type of anatomy is predisposed to getting mural means wall, atherosclerosis along the wall of their basilar artery, and have increased risk for brainstem stroke. So the reason I tell you that is nobody knows if you've got this anatomy or not. So it's smart to assume that you do and just live accordingly. These usually only mildly increase risk. Okay, let's say it increases the risk 20% or something. Well, if you live healthy, people who live healthy, with low-fat, low-sodium vegan diet, get their exercise and sleep, they never get atherosclerosis, 0%. Even if they've got these predispositions, they'll probably never ever have a problem whatsoever. So that's what you do. That's the smart thing to do. Let's see. And by the way, the same person who'll never get atherosclerosis will usually never get hypertension, diabetes, obesity, coronary artery disease, abdominal pressure, all these diseases. They all go together. See, the way medical school teaches and the way most people think in America is they think of these as all separate diseases. But in reality, they're all pretty much connected. There's occasions where people get one and not the other, but in general, they're pretty connected, okay? Along some spectrum, a person's got some of these or all of them. For example, if somebody says to me, okay, they present a patient to me. People present patients to me all the time, and they start out by saying 60-year-old man. As soon as I hear 60-year-old man, I automatically think that patient has about 20 diseases, at least 10. Here's what I assume the patient has diseases. They're almost always fat, obese. They're almost always pre-diabetic or diabetic. They almost always have fatty liver. They almost always have abdominal pressure syndrome. They almost always are hypertensive. They almost always have coronary artery disease. And they very often are impotent. They are at high risk for heart attack, high risk for stroke, high risk for cancer. They very often have cataracts that may or may not need or benefit from surgery at this point. They very often have gastroesophageal reflux disease. Of course, that's part of abdominal pressure syndrome. They routinely have a big prostate. They might have prostate cancer or whatnot. But what I'm trying, and a whole bunch of other diseases they're at high risk for. Because these are all the standard Western diseases. They all go together. They're going to have degenerative disc disease of their spine. There's a good chance they're going to have gallstones, etc., okay? Okay, so what I'm trying to say is if you avoid the Western disease, you, for the most part, you pretty much avoid all these diseases. Certainly, you're relatively unlikely to get them. You know, you might have already got them from what you did before 25 or 30, but you can at least usually control them quite well. All right, so now let's get, what's the main point of this whole talk? What are the most common reasons that some vegans get sick? Usually because they're high-fat vegans. I think this whole school of high-fat veganism is a big joke. I think it's a big lie. I've told you before, I don't think it's any good fats. I've made several lectures about that. Fat is fat. And, you know, McDougall tells you the truth. You know, that old guy, he's smart, he knows a lot, and he tells you the truth. That's why I say McDougall's the best of the nutrition doctors, okay? He's not trying to BS you. You know, he's not trying to sell you, you know, soy. He's not trying to sell you, you know, omega-3s and olive oil and all this BS, okay? You know, so what I'm trying to say is these high-fat vegans, they get sick. You know, people telling you to eat nuts and seeds. I personally think that's stupid, okay? Why would you want to eat more fat? You know, and I know there's a big craze for flax. And I haven't studied flax in that much detail, but it's like the most estrogenic food. It's like many, many tens of thousands of times more estrogenic than other foods. You know, I'm an old school wrestler, man. I don't want to be eating estrogenic chemicals. Come on. For some reason, though, people fall in love with this. Like I said, I got kicked out of a Facebook group for criticizing soy. Okay. Also, a lot of people don't eat organic. I think that's a big mistake. I actually think, you know, that trend of saying, oh, organic doesn't matter, I think that is wrong, completely wrong. If you've studied the biochemistry of glyphosate, you will not want to eat non-organic food, okay? Certainly not all non-organic food is sprayed with glyphosate, but you will want to avoid it, okay? And the GMO stuff, the GMO corn, the GMO soy, you don't want to eat that stuff. Come on. And soy is often processed with hexane. There's a lot of toxins there. The other thing, too, is you really ought to filter your water. I know a lot of people. I have a lot of doctors. I recently was talking to a real smart lady neuroradiologist doctor, and she's still drinking tap water in a spot where I know the water is not well filtered and it's got, you know, F- in it and all this stuff. Those are toxic chemicals, okay? They're metabolic poisons. You don't want to eat that stuff. And also, I get weird things. People are asking me all the time about some relative or friend. Can I talk to them or, you know, go over there? history? Like, here's a typical thing. I got a, you know, 30-year-old lady, and she's, you know, having dizziness, headaches, falling down. And so, you know, I ask them. The other thing, too, is a lot of times medicine does not take good occupational histories. It's important to do that. So this lady is a hairdresser, and she has a hair salon in her basement. And she's, you know, she dyes people's hair and does all the fancy stuff, all the shampoos, the perms, and all that stuff. And hairsprays. Well, she's inhaling all those chemicals, and her salon is in her house in her basement where there's no windows. I told her, you know, you gotta move your salon to somewhere else. You know, put it on the ground floor where you can open the window, have a fan to blow that stuff out of there. Otherwise, you're probably just gonna get sicker. Come on. A lot of those hairsprays are really like glue. So all day long, you're like sniffing glue, and you might, you know, say some low life drug addict on the corner sniffing glue. But that's what you're doing if you're spraying hairspray on people all day long and you're not ventilating the room. Anyway, so a lot of people have toxic exposures. You know, I'd say probably the majority of vegans are high-fat vegan, which is stupid. A lot of them don't watch their sodium intake. I think that's stupid. So anyway, sometimes we never know, but what I'm trying to say is don't just assume there's not more you can do. There's a lot you can do. There's a very good reason why I recommend the Spartan vegan diet. And there's a reason why, you know, like I said, I think, you know, all these guys, McDougall and Esselstyn and T. Colin Campbell are great. You know, they deserve, you know, the greatest, highest recognition. But I'm also going to tell you something. I'm stricter than they are, okay? I come from the background of being a brain doctor, and the brain is way more fussy than is the heart. They're usually all, you know, internal medicine-based guys or something. Most of them, not all of them. You know, Esselstyn comes from a surgery background. Campbell's a PhD. But what I'm trying to say is they're usually thinking as long as we can prevent coronary artery disease, we pretty much accomplished our task of making a person healthy. And I would not agree with that. My attitude is you make yourself optimally healthy when you protect your brain. And there are tons of brain toxins from MSG, alcohol, all the stimulants, caffeine, tobacco, aspartame, all of the SERCA inhibitors, all of the mitochondria inhibitors, the heavy metals, the aluminum, all this stuff, okay? There's a lot of them. We don't have time to go into this thing, but what I'm trying to say is there's a lot more things a person could usually do that they're not doing. So there's reason for hope, and if they want to try to improve their health, they should get moving on this stuff. You cannot ignore toxicology. That is a big mistake of the vegan community.